Last week, we learned the sugya of Maisa Shabbos. This week, we're learning a similar sugya related. It's Maisa Shabbos in Sif Aleph, was when one did a Maisa Shabbos be'isser. Dahainu, he did something on Shabbos that he was not allowed to do. Bein b'shoigig, bein b'mezid. We spoke about misasek. And then what are the halachas? What's the results of somebody who does something when he's not allowed to do it? This week, Sif Beis discusses when a person on Shabbos, he does something that he is allowed to do. Not only is he allowed to do Hazaras Harezim Meshubach, one that on Shabbos does something for a chayla, so that's not considered on Shabbos to be Chilul Shabbos. That's considered to be a mitzvah gedola. The Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Kav Ches says Hazaras Harezim Meshubach. So over here we're dealing in Siv Beis where somebody did a Maisa Shabbos. He did something on Shabbos that he was allowed to do. And now we want to know what's the result of that Maisa Shabbos for somebody who's not the chayla. What's the din on Shabbos for somebody who isn't a chayla, but he was shechted for a chayla? Am I allowed, the healthy person, to partake in the suda of this person that was shechted for be'oifen heter? That's the difference between Siv Aleph and Siv Beis, and that's the Sturas Advarim over here in Shin Yud Ches. Now, I must tell you, there's slightly difficult the sugya. What I plan on doing today is like this. In order to get us into the sugya and make it easier, I'm going to break up the sugya into two parts. First, I'm going to tell the raid to the oilam, just the various ideas, what you need to know about the sugya of ribui shiurim. What is our sugya? Our sugya is that we are afraid that when one does a chilul Shabbos, beheter, because the person was sick or he has some type of a heter for a chayli, so now we're afraid that the person perhaps is going to be marbe in the shear and go and do extra Chilul Shabbos, which was not necessary for the chayla. And that, for sure, we're going to see today is problematic. That's what the starting point of Sif Beis. That's called Ribui Shiurim. When one is doing an Isser mitzad, the additional shiurim, he's being marbe in the shear of the Isser. He did one action, and then he did extra actions, which we'll have to discuss what's called an extra action, etc. But first and foremost, let me get you into the sugya a little bit, and then in Mitzvah Shem, we'll get into a lot of the halacha l'maisa and a lot of geshmaka cases, which are mamish halacha l'maisa. But let's first bring the oilam into the sugya. The Shulchan Aruch, based on the Gemara, of course, this is the same Gemara in Chulin on Daf Tes Vav that the oilam saw. The Gemara says, "Ashoichet b'Shabbos l'chayla." One that shechs on Shabbos for a chayla. So Bain if he was sick yesterday, Bain if he was sick today, mutter habari lechol mimenu chai. This is based on a Gemara in Chulin that the Gemara says, Hilchos hashoichet l'chayla b'Shabbos. One that shechs for someone sick on Shabbos, it's mutter for a healthy person to enjoy that meat. Now, not that much enjoyment he's going to get from the meat, Rabbi Isai, because he's going to be eating that meat be'oimtza, when it's raw. What's the reason why? So the Gemara says a very important statement, because because it's not possible to shecht it's not possible to get a kezayis basar without a shchita. That means one shchita services this entire cow. So since one shchita services this entire cow, there's nothing to worry about. What are you afraid of? He's not going to shecht a different cow. So what are you afraid of? So he had to shecht for the chayla anyways. So therefore, I'm allowed to partake in the hana. A healthy person would be allowed to partake in the hana when it was shechted beheter, shechted for a sick person. Kika shachet adai did the chayla, so he shechted for the unhealthy, for the sick person. Hamevasha l'chayla b'Shabbos, says the Shulchan Aruch. But if you cook for somebody on Shabbos or shar melachis, so then it's asur lebari, then you're not allowed. Why? Because technically I would have been allowed to eat that piece of meat. They cooked the piece of meat for a sick person, and they had a right to cook that piece of meat because he was a chayla sheish b'sakana v'asot gedaftas. He needed it. And technically I, the healthy person, would have been allowed to partake in that meal. However, we're afraid of shema yarbe b'shviloi. We're afraid that he's going to add on an extra piece of meat, and that is not allowed. There's an issur to be marbe b'shvila. There's an issur. Now it can't be we're just talking about he's going to cook a whole separate piece of meat, perhaps, because that would be pashit. It sounds like we're even saying that he's in the same pot and he's going to be adding in extra pieces of meat in the same pot, which he put anyways onto the fire. But each and every additional groigerous that he's adding into the cooking process, which was not necessary for the chayla, is going to be considered a ribui shiurim. So Chazal said you can't even partake in the cooked food for the chayla, which was cooked beheter, because we're afraid you're going to add which is not going to be allowed. So let's get a little bit of background over here to try and understand it, and then we'll get into all the geschmacka cases that come out. The truth is, this Sif itself in Shulchan Aruch is jam-packed. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about a lot of the things over here, but this sugya itself is mamish a jam-packed Shulchan Aruch. One thing you see over here is very interesting. You see over here that raw meat seems to not be muksa, because if raw meat were muksa, so then how is the healthy person eating the raw meat? Typically, that raw meat is muksa. And this is the shita of many of the poskim. It's a very big machlekes. Maybe we'll learn at a different time in Siman Shin Ches. What's the status of raw meat? Do we say that since technically you could eat raw meat, so therefore it's not muksa? Or do we say, but people aren't going to eat it? And there's a question, is there a difference between today and thousands of years ago when people maybe did eat raw meet? Or a poisai, maybe in 2021, we've gone back to 2,000 years ago, because there's people out there that eat raw meat, not just raw fish. So this is a big shaila, and the next time Chalila Le'aleinu, your freezer breaks and you want to know what to do. All the raw meat, is it muksa? Am I allowed to take it out and put it in the other freezer? Am I allowed to go and put it in a different, somebody else, a neighbor's freezer? So the halacha is, and the Shulchan Aruch says that raw meat, at least b'shas tzchak, is not considered muksa. That's in first Shulchan Aruch over here. Okay, it could be that a lot of places can say not to be saimich on that, but if a freezer breaks, so then certainly there's a makom to be makel. About if you can get a guy, you should get a guy. But that's one halacha that we don't have time to talk about, which comes out of our sugya. Another interesting halacha. What's the halacha of eating raw meat, Rabbi Yitzhak, that was not salted? Our sugya says the Mishnah Berurah over here is talking about raw meat that wasn't salted. It says the Mishnah Berurah, you have to wash off the blood, which is on the outside, but the raw meat itself, he says you could eat. Rabbi Yitzhak, when I eat it, aren't I eating blood? There's blood inside here, no? I didn't salt it yet. No. Says the Mishnah Berurah, because that's called dam that was not pirish. The dam didn't come out yet. So if the dam didn't come out yet, then it's not a problem. The only time it's a problem is if the dam came out. If you would cook it, the dam would come out. Very interesting shayla. I'll let you think about this, Rabbi Isai. Is he allowed to chew the meat, or does he have to swallow the meat whole? Because if you chew it, maybe you're pressing and blood is going to come out. When we'll get to the Agudah Mitzvah Hashem, one day we'll get there. Bezos Hashem Bli Neder to Yeridei Samach Tes and Hilchos Malicha. Bez Hashem, we'll talk about that then. And one last thing over here, of a side topic, quite a side topic, but the Mishnah Berurah over here, a very interesting Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah brings down, I'll read you the Mishnah Berurah's lashon. He says, Asr b'Shabbos, it's Asr on Shabbos. We have a situation of where, I'll read you actually upstairs first, excuse me. Over here it says, in the Ramah, afilu bishul a goy, even if a goy cooks the food for you on Shabbos, even that's aser, because of the says the Mishnah Berurah, it's aser b'Shabbos lebari. If a goy cooks for a sick person on Shabbos, so then the bari can't partake in it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, aval b'motzei Shabbos muter miyad. On motzei Shabbos, the food that the goy cooked for the sick person on Shabbos, you're allowed to have on Motzei Shabbos, not on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why? Because Ayeni Yehudi Bishul Beheter, since the guy cooked it with Heter, so then we don't make you wait Kadesha Yasu, a concept that we spoke about last time. But also, there's no Gzeira of Bishul Akum Hagra. Mishnah Berurah brings the Gra. What does the Mishnah Berurah say over here? It's very important, Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah says over here that if a person, a guy cooked on Shabbos for a chayla, for a person that was sick, so then they didn't make a gzeira special akum. So on Shabbos, you can't eat it because we're afraid Shema Yarba. But Motzei Shabbos, you're allowed to partake in that food. It's a good trivia question. When in the world is there ever heter to eat a steak that was cooked by a guy? So the answer is very simple. If the guy cooked the steak on Shabbos for a chayla, she'esh by sakana, or such as case, so then on Motzei Shabbos, you're allowed to eat the steak cooked by a guy. Now, I tell you a very interesting piece of our history. Bekitzer mamish, not our sugya. In Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Kav Ches, it's going on Shulchan Aruch Sif Yud Tes. Over here, the Shulchan Aruch says chayla she'ein by sakana. If there's a chayla that's ein by sakana, that means he's bedridden, but he's not a pekuach nefesh. So it says in the Shulchan Aruch, mutter bishul goy, ein a bishul akum is mutter. So it says over here in the Shulchan Aruch, bishul akum is mutter in a situation for a chayla she'ein by sakana. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here something incredible. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what's going on here? What's the din for a bari? Listen to Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah says, "Hachayla mashenishar lemotzei Shabbos aser." Says the Mishnah Berurah, what's left over on Motzei Shabbos, when the chayla got cooked for by the goy on Shabbos, is not allowed to be eaten on Motzei Shabbos, even for the chayla himself. Certainly not for a healthy person. So the kasha is l'chayr, it's a stira. Here the Mishnah Berurah tells us if a goy cooks on Shabbos, in a case where the goy had a right to cook, even a bari on Motzei Shabbos is allowed to partake in the Suda. Over there, the Mishnah Berurah says when a goy had a heter to cook on Shabbos, so now Motzei Shabbos, not only is the bari not allowed to eat, but even the chayla is not allowed to eat, because now it's Bishul Akum. It was only on Shabbos that we had no choice. Stira. You know who asked this question? The son of the Chafetz Chaim asked this question. And he says a most remarkable statement, and it's actually quite a controversial statement. I'm not happy to start the shir with a controversial statement, but I can't hold back, Rabbi Say. The Chafetz Chaim's son said, that's a kasha? He said, that's not a kasha. My father asked me to write parts of the Mishnah Berurah. I wrote Siman Shin Kav Ches. My father wrote Siman Shin Yud Ches. Actually, you'll see, there's different styles. Shin Yud Ches, it's a different type of style than Shin Kav Ches, and there's a lot of places like this. And I paskin, this is a machlekes between the Ra'ah and the Rashba. I paskin one way, my father paskins a different way. Somebody that hears such a statement, he gets very nervous, and maybe he has to take the Mishnah Berurah and learn it over again. The Chazon Ish, when he heard this statement, the Chazon Ish said, Sheker v'chazov. How can you say Sheker v'chazov? You think that the son of the Chafetz Chaim is lying? So the Chazon Ish explained, Avada, the son of the Chafetz Chaim, wrote Shin Kav Ches, and he wrote other parts too. But says the Chazon Ish, but his father, the Chafetz Chaim, when he took it back, he read every single word with the pen, with the eyes of the Chafetz Chaim. So that means if he let it in there, it means he holds of it. So now you have to answer the stira. I'm going to leave that for you, Rabbi said, for a different time. There seems to be a stira. Maybe the answer is there's a difference between chayla she'ein by sakana and a chayla she'yesh by sakana. I told you a case of a chayla she'yesh by sakana. That's our sugya when the guy cooks for a chayla she'yesh by sakana. So maybe that's leishchiach. It's a leishchiach thing. So maybe they weren't geyser bishul akum in such a situation. And if they weren't geyser bishul akum, therefore it's mutter for the bari on Motzei Shabbos. Mashen kein in Siman Shin Kav Ches. Maybe over there is a chayla she'ein by sakana. And therefore, that's more shchiach. And therefore, Chazal gave a heter, obviously, for bishul akum because the person is sick, but they were geyser bishul akum. And therefore, a healthy person can't have it. And even the chayla and Motzei Shabbos can't have it. Chaim Kanievsky asked the question, and Shayna Lachas, many asked the question, but that's not the Iker Sugya. The Iker Sugya today, Rabbi Isai, is the Sugya of b'shiurim. Let me be machnis to oilam over here into the Sugya of b'shiurim over here, Rabbi Isai. The first shaila, first and foremost, is Bריבוי, Shiurim, Drabanan or Deraisa. What does it mean? Like we keep saying, what exactly is Bריבוי Shiurim? The basic concept of a Bריבוי Shiur is that a person is doing more Shiurim than, we'll see, at least in our case, than what was allowed, right? What was allowed was this person needed one piece of chicken and he put in a whole chicken. That's a Bריבוי of the shiur. This person, he's a sick person. How much is he going to eat? But you put in, he goes and he cooks up for this fellow some chicken soup. How much is the sick person going to eat of the chicken soup? He's going to have 1 cup of chicken soup. So he wants to know, could I just take the entire pot and cook it up for this chayla? That would be a Bריבוי of the shiur. That's a Bריבוי of the shiur. Our halacha, we learned, is that the bari is not allowed to partake even in the mutter part because we're afraid you're going to be marbit in the shiur. You're going to add more soup than that which is necessary. That's called Bריבוי shiurim. Now, this din of Bריבוי shiurim, Rabbi Isai, is this a din of deraisa or is this an isser d'rabanan? Maybe he's doing the malacha anyways with just additional shiurim. Maybe that's only an isser d'rabanan. And you should know that the sheet of Toisis in Menachos and Dav Samach Dalid is mefurish. Leika ella isser d'rabanan. Again, today first, Rabbi said, let me give you all the yada, the knowledge, and then we'll be equal, and then we'll down some cases. That's Shitas Taisvis. The Rashba b'shem his Rebbe in Chulin and Daf Tesvavim Beis. He says, "Har sugya hamavashel l'chayla b'Shabbos is usher for a bari. It's usher for a bari. Why? Gzeira, you might add pieces of meat. Perish my Rebbe. My Rebbe said, what's the gzeira? Shema achar shianiach hakdeira la'esh. I'm afraid that after he puts the chicken soup on the fire, I'm not afraid he's going to add more soup into the same pot. I'm afraid he's going to add a whole different piece. And then he can come to the skila. Aval ein lefarish shall be marbe chatichas into the pot, because says the Rebbe of the Rashba, because that wouldn't be an issa deraisa. That would be only an issa derabanan. And he said, that's why on Yontif, we know on Yontif, there's a heter of Ribu Shurim, which Mitzvah Hashem will talk about soon. On Yontif, when a person wants to know, can I cook up a whole chicken soup? And I'm doing it not for today, I'm doing it for tomorrow. I'm doing it, meaning also for tomorrow. I'm doing it for Yontif Rishon and Yontif Sheni. Normally, of course, you're not allowed to cook for Yontif Sheni on Yontif Rishon. But if you're doing Ribu Shurim, there certainly is a heter, Ayin and Shulchan Aruch, Tavkov Gimel. There's a heter for a person to be marba b'shiurim. Says the Rebbe of the Rashba, why are you allowed to be marba b'shiurim? How are you not allowed to cook for the next day? So he says it must be the whole entire din of Ribi Shiurim is only D'Rabbanan, and therefore they weren't geyser, which Mitzvah Hashem that we'll try to talk about. That's the sheet of the Toises, that's the sheet of the Rebbe, the Rashba, and that's the sheet of the Rashba himself. In Beit Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, the Rashba himself says, Al Maleka Issa Deraisa, it's only a din D'Rabbanan. This is not the sheet of the Ran in Beitza. The Ran in Beitza and Daf Tesamad Beis. The Ran says, Kol that the Ikar Malach is Aser, Av Toisvis Kamayu Umitzah Deraisa. Shitas Ran is that there's an Isser Deraisa of Ribu Shiurim. Very big Yisai, Rabbi Yisai. In the Poiskim, the Chuvas Ramon Simenayin Vav, which we'll see in a moment from the Machan Yisrael, he says Ribu Shiurim is D'Rabbanan. Who says Ribu Shiurim is Deraisa? Rebbe the Mishnah Berurah and Sivkat and Yud Gimel. He brings down Litein Basar L'Toicha Gedera Zeiser Deraisa Kishemar Bebeshviloi Afilu Mar Bepanechas. Then he says V'yesh Oimrim D'Rabbanan. Yesh Oimrim D'Rabbanan. Sounds like the Mishnah Berurah. The Ikar Shita is that Ribu Shiurim is Deraisa. The Ikar Smoisha Rebbe in Chelik Beis and Siman Kuf Gimel. The Ikar Smoisha says Ribu Shiurim with Chad Tircha even on Shabbos Aser Midaraisa. So that's Rabbi Yisai part one. We see it's a big machlekes Rishonim. Pashtis, you have to be chayshish that perhaps Ribu Shiurim is even Deraisa, but you have to know there's a shita that Ribu Shiurim is D'Rabbanan. And this brings us to an incredible Machan Yisrael. The Chofetz Chaim here in Mishnah Berurah, he tells you, go and look in the Sefer Avos Chesed that I was mevarer, that there's a diak in Avos Chesed that I was mevarer that the Ikar is that Ribu Shiurim is Deraisa. Now, the truth is, that's a little bit beyond the scope of today's shir. It's a very difficult Chofetz Chaim. Ayin in the Minchas Yitzchak and Chelik Hey and Siman Lamed Vav, where he explains what exactly was the Chofetz Chaim's diak in Avos Chesed. And that's something that it's very difficult. What exactly was the Chofetz Chaim's raya that Ribu Shiurim is Deraisa? But there's an incredible Machaneh Yisrael, also a sefer of the Chofetz Chaim, that in the 31st parak, he has a Hagah there, an incredible Hagah. He says like this, what happens in those days? This was a terrible matzav. The people, the Jewish soldiers, they were stuck in the army. And sometimes the commander, the general says, okay, Rabbi Yisai, we're going. And you're going to start telling him, no, Shabbos hayoim, shtuken erev. You're going to start telling him, ich hab noch nicht gegangen into the mikveh. He's going to give you a Misha Beirach. He's telling you, we're going. That's it, right? So now, what the Chofetz Chaim used to say, how is it that the people that they came out of the army, they were in the army for 25 years and they were so lazy afterward, they couldn't get out of bed. He said, in the army, you know what they did? The commander came in, he struck a match. From the time the match was from the top till the bottom, if it touched the finger, you had to be dressed with the boots on tight. And oy vavoy to the person that slept with the boots. You know, I guess they held of the Gemara in Yuma that a person that sleeps in his shoes, that's considered a Toyim Tamisa, Kipshutai. So what happened afterward? They became so lazy? Because it wasn't coming from them. It wasn't coming. They were forced to do it. So over here, the Chofetz Chaim is talking that the commander says, we're leaving. We're going off base. Said the Chofetz Chaim, what happens? They tell you you're leaving. So now for Shteitzach, there's certain things you have to take for Pekuach Nefesh. He's got to take his gun. He's got to take, he's got to take probably his provisions. It's Pekuach Nefesh. So says the Chofetz Chaim, B'kai Governor, could he throw in his tefillin? Could he throw in his tefillin? Could he throw in his a sitter? Could he throw in all these things? What's the shaila? The shaila is l'chayra, he's being over an Eitzah. So if he's being over an Eitzah, l'chayra, this is extra Eitzah. This is Ribu Shiurim of Eitzah. Says the Chofetz Chaim, if I could prove to you that Ribu Shiurim is D'Rabbanan, like the Shita of the Rashba, so says the Chofetz Chaim, so then he's not doing a deraisa. He's carrying in his bag. What's he carrying? He's carrying his gun. He's carrying his provisions that are pikuach nefesh. So now what's he doing when he adds another pair of tefillin, another groigeris, another siddur? All these things are ribu shiurim, additional shiurim of Eitzah. Says the Chafetz Chaim, no, maybe you could be Seimich on the Rashba. You see over here, what was the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisai, the grace of Koyach Akula of the Eilik Chafetz Chaim? He brings over here the Chuvas Ramon Siman Ayin Vav. He said the Rashba is not a Das Yechida against the Ran. He brings down over here that you should know that perhaps you could be Seimich in this incredible Malkim Atchak on the sheet of the Rashba. Now this, it's very difficult to understand the Chafetz Chaim. All he did was he proved to us that Ribui Shurim could potentially be the Rabbanan, which is not a stira to what he says in the Mishnah Berurah. In the Mishnah Berurah, he brings a stam and the Yeshayimim, and perhaps he holds that the Iker Shita is that Ribui Shurim is the Raisa. But Rabbi Yisai, these people, it means he's going to be for months and years without tefillin. It was a death sentence. So the Mishnah Berurah held that you could be Seimich on the sheet of the Ran, on the Rashba and the Ramah, and to consider Ribui Shurim to be the Rabbanan, and therefore when he's anyways carrying out his gun, so we'll let him carry also. We'll let him carry also his Tehillim, his Siddur, his any of his Jewish artifacts, Rabbi Yisai, the things that he needs. So that's understandable. What's an interesting thing in the Mishnah Berurah is what's the heter? It's still an Isser D'Rabbanan. Where do we find that there's a heter to do an Isser D'Rabbanan b'makim mitzvah by a Jew? By a guy, we know there's a concept of a shvus to shvus, b'makim mitzvah. But over here, who's going to do the D'Rabbanan? We agree for sure, Ribui Shurim is also Rabbi Yisai. It's only either D'Raisa or it's the Rabbanan. And not getting kach, Rabbi Yisai, remember this for the rest of your life. There's a tzad out there that Ribui Shurim is the Rabbanan. And nonetheless, we don't let you on Shabbos, even for a chayla, go and do Ribui Shurim. We don't allow you to do Ribui Shurim even for a chayla. So it's either the Rabbanan or it's the D'Raisa. That's clear. So then let's say it's the Rabbanan, because Shatz Atchak, it'll be Seimach on the Rashba. So it's still the Rabbanan. When do we ever have a heter in Kol Kula for a Jew to do an Isser D'Rabbanan? Where do you find such a thing? That for a Jew, there's going to be a heter to do an Isser D'Rabbanan, and to, in this case, the Isser D'Rabbanan of Ribui Shurim. Now, I must tell you, I didn't see anyone ask this kasha. I guess Chafetz Chaim held that Adam is boiled, this matziv, he's very nervous, and he's going to, if you don't give him a heter to do D'Rabbanans, perhaps he's going to come to do the D'Raisas. Maybe he'll dig a hole and put his tefillin inside, like we find this concept in Shin Lamed Daled. But here you see the grace of koyach of the Heilig of Chafetz Chaim, where the Chafetz Chaim over here says that Ribui Shurim, there's a tzad gadol to consider Ribui Shurim D'Rabbanan, at least in our case. Now, the Chafetz Chaim goes on to have a very interesting shaila. I'm not so sure what the Olam tell me what they think about this shaila. Chafetz Chaim is a huge chiddush. Chafetz Chaim dons, do I have to put it all in one bag? Or can I even hold it in two hands? You know, they had to hold their gun in one hand, and maybe the only thing he had to bring was his gun. So Chafetz Chaim declares, Yesh Ladin, when I have my gun in my hand, am I allowed to have my tefillin in my other hand, in my bag? Or no, I got to put it all together in a bag. Chafetz Chaim's not so sure about this. What's even more interesting is that the Shmiras Shabbos Hilchos is mistapik if a person has two different begodim. He has, like, you know, let's say his jacket over here and his pants. And his pants, he's carrying one thing, and his jacket, he's carrying another thing. So do we consider that to be a totally different carrying? Or is that also Ribui Shurim? Be'ani, in my smallness, I just don't understand the shaila, Rabbi Yisai. Why wouldn't that be Ribui Shurim? Hooray, my body is the thing there's a difference between my leg, and there's a difference between my toes and my hand and this hand and that hand. My body is moving these items. So if I have a heter to move the item of Pikuach Nefesh, so then Ribui Shurim will say that anything else that I'm moving is only an Isser D'Rabbanan. What's the difference where it is? What's the difference if it's in my hand? What's the difference if it's in my pocket? Hard to understand. But that is the suffix. From this Chafetz Chaim, you have a raya against a Goyin Agadol Rav Moshe, a very, very big Rav Moshe, very famous Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe has a very big chiddush in the Ribui Shurim sugya. Rav Moshe says, let's say on Yontif, where everybody knows there's a heter of Ribui Shurim. So Rav Moshe says that even though we have a heter of Ribui Shurim on Yontif, says Rav Moshe, oh, I see somebody already is asking the question. Says Rav Moshe, that heter of Ribui Shurim is not going to allow me to bring my ring of keys. You know that guy with the ring of keys, Rabbi Yisai? He's got the key to this room and to that room and to all the old diras and to everybody else's dira and the brother-in-law and everything. So he's got that ring of keys. So the halacha is that you're allowed to carry your key on Yontif. You got to get into your house. No, am I allowed to carry the ring of keys? I have all the other keys. So Moshe says, you don't have a heter on Yontif because of Ribi Shiurim. Says Ramesha, the only heter of Ribi Shiurim is something like cigarettes. I guess if you hold that cigarettes is mutter on Yontif, or tissues or diapers, that I have a need for a tissue. So now I'm allowed to carry 100 tissues. You're not going to use 100 tissues, but Riboy Shiurim says I'm allowed to be marbeh in the shear of all the same thing. I guess because every one of them is potential usage. So to the diaper lach, so to the tissues, and all things, cigarettes that are the same. But says Rav Moshe, Riboy Shiurim is not going to allow you to carry a different chayfetz, a key that doesn't work on this door, that works on an other door. That's not going to be considered Riboy Shiurim, says Rav Moshe. And Riboy Shiurim does not allow me to carry the other keys. That's the chiddush of Goyin Rav Moshe Feinstein Zeichet Tzadik Levracha. Rabbi Yisai, from this Machane Yisrael, the sefer that the Chofetz Chaim wrote for the army chevra, this is the first not like Rav Moshe. The first not like Rav Moshe. Over here, you see, he's carrying a gun, and Chofetz Chaim wants to bring in tefillin and tehillim and all other things that it could be considered a Riboy Shiurim, even though it has nothing to do with the previous product. But Riboy Shiurim is that I'm already doing the malacha, and that all I'm doing now is being marbeh in the shear of that malacha. All I'm doing is adding more of that type of. I'm doing one ma'aseh malacha with many shiurim. So then it doesn't matter if it's a tilim, it doesn't matter if it's a gun. Once I have the heter on the gun, Riboy Shiurim, the other item will be considered a Riboy Shiurim, which will only be nechshav a drabanan by pikuach nefesh, or will be mutter gomer on yontif. So therefore, this is not like Rav Moshe. The truth is, you see in the Eretz Tzvi, the Shiva Chachmei Lublin, the Kazik lover, he also seems to say not like Rav Moshe. He has an interesting shaila about Riboy Shiurim. Here's a shaila: why is it that by Riboy Shiurim we find that on Yontif, why is it that on Yontif we don't find that there's a din of a person checking his pockets? We don't find on Yontif checking pockets. We find on Shabbos checking pockets. So he dons over there. Maybe you're going to say, what do you mean? Because you're allowed to carry on Yontif. So he says, very nice. You're allowed to carry on Yontif. But you're only allowed to carry l'tzarech. You're not allowed to carry for no tzarech. You're not allowed to carry for tomorrow. So how is it that we don't have a din that you should check your pockets? Maybe you're carrying something which is totally not negaya. So says the Eretz Tzvi, I'll tell you why. Because b'derek klal, what does a person have in his pockets? He b'derek klal has a bunch of things. There's that chever that has lots of things. He says one of the things he's going to need for Yontif anyways. One of the things he's going to need for Yontif anyways, says the Eretz Tzvi. So all the other things in his pockets that he doesn't need for Yontif, they'll be considered Riboy Shiurim. So therefore, there's no need to check your pockets because you're always going to have at least one thing that you do need for Yontif. And therefore, the other things could be nechshav as a Riboy Shiurim. And therefore, Riboy Shiurim and Yontif is mutter. So what do you see from the Eretz Tzvi? The Leica going Rav Moshe, because you see that was talking about two totally different things. And Hafapike is after Riboy Shiurim. So I guess Rav Moshe, I suppose, is a chiddush. And going Rav Moshe. Moshe is a chiddush. The Shmir Shabbos Hilchos in Siman Lamed Beis in Siv Kotin Samech Vav. He says, what if a doctor needs to use a light? Right? Let's say a doctor needs to use a light and he doesn't need, it has 4 bulbs. I'm looking right now up over here. I have 2 bulbs over here in my light. So let's say a person, he's a doctor, it's pikuach nefesh, they come to him on Shabbos. So he has to go into the room and he has to turn on the light. Says the Shmir Shabbos, well, if he has one room that has a bulb, has 4 connected bulbs, and he has a different room which has 1 connected bulb, he says, so then you should use the room with the 1 bulb, if you could, obviously, for the pikuach nefesh, and not use the room with the 4 bulbs, because the room with the 4 bulbs, that's a Riboy Shiurim. If you don't need it, there's no heter on Shabbos for Riboy Shiurim. More so, Rabbi Yisai. More so, in Ha'ara Samach Zayin, that was in Ha'ara Samach Vav. In Ha'ara Samach Zayin, he says, interesting, Asiv Samach Zayin, excuse me, he says, let's say you have a bulb with is 100 watt. You guys remember watts? Probably. He has one bulb which is 100 watts, and he has a different bulb which is 150 watts. So he says, well, the 150 watts is mechamem, it heats up the matris, the metal in the bulb, it heats it up more. So he says, the person, if he's able to, he should choose the bulb with the 100 watts if he's able to, and not the bulb with 150 watts. More so, Rabbi say. Let's say a person has to drive to the hospital on Shabbos. He has 2 cars. A lot of people have 2 cars, right? And so he has 2 cars. So now he has a small car and he has a bigger car. Rabbi say, which car? I'm not talking about one of these fancy Teslas or whatever they're called that drive yourself or whatever. I'm talking about an old-fashioned car that has gasoline and dust. So he has a car that has gasoline. He has a choice of he's got a minivan and he's got a small sports car. So which car should he drive to the hospital for the pikuach nefesh? L'chayra, he should drive the smaller car because the smaller car is going to obviously do less chilul Shabbos, right? I think every time you press the pedal on a regular car, it's 6,000 chilulei Shabbos every single time. There's combustion. Kavachomer when you're taking the big car. So Ribui Shiurim would say it's true you have a heter pikuach nefesh, but there's an isser of Ribui Shiurim. Be it Rabbanan, be it deraisa. Be it Rabbanan, be it deraisa. Now I don't know about an electric car. That I don't know. Is it? I wonder if it takes more electricity. I'm not an electrician, and I guess you're gonna have to find this out. But maybe Taka. I don't know. Maybe Taka, right? And like I said before, let's say you have to cook up chicken soup for somebody that's sick on Shabbos. So then your baisai, you have to see what this chayla needs. And you're not going to be allowed on Shabbos to go and take, it's very convenient, take the whole entire pot of chicken soup and just put it on the fire.
One of the Chevra was Meyer that the Mitzvah from this topic.
We're going to tell you, take out what is it that the chayla needs. The chayla requires a revius, so you should go and cook up the revius and don't cook up the entire pot. You're not going to need to cook up the whole entire pot. Now, I had a shaila on the Shmir Shabbos, which I see afterward. The Shmir Shabbos himself dons. The shaila is like this. The shaila is that what happens if I have that 4-bulb situation? Okay, I come into a room. I'm a doctor. It's a pikuach nefesh. I have to turn on the light. Now, there's 4 bulbs. My case has 2 bulbs. There's 2 bulbs. Should I take out the bulb? Should I remove one of the bulbs? I have no choice. I don't have 2 options. I have this room. This room is attached by 4 bulbs. When I turn on the light, 4 bulbs are going on. So should I take off one of the lights? Should I, unscrew the light bulb? Should I unscrew one of the light bulbs so that when I'm going to turn on the light, only one light is going to go on? So I don't know what to tell you. At first I thought, no, because when you're taking out a light bulb, that's seiser, like I'm seeing over here that the Talmidei Chachamim are saying. That's seiser. So I thought, yeah, but wait a minute. This is a seiser. I'm not taking it out in order to rebuild. I'm taking it out. So it's a seiser. So I thought, great. So then maybe I should take it out because B'Shiurim is a possible deraisa, and seiser shaloyam anas live nice is drabanan. But then I realized, Mistam, I'm wrong, because the Taz brings down. Okay, so muksa is for sure just the rabbanan. So the muksa also maybe you could do the muksa with a shinoi. Okay, but the Taz brings down that they have these windows. I don't know in Eretz Yisrael they do have them. In Chutz La'aretz, I don't remember if they have them, but they have these windows which are not really attached. They're just, they fit into a track, and you just lift them up and you pull them out of the track. And the Taz says, the Mishabura brings us down in Siman Shin Yud Gimel, that if you take that out on Shabbos, you're over on Seiser Deraisa. Because by Seiser and Baina, in order to be over on Seiser and Baina, one need not to be using mamish with nails and cement. Whatever has a oneness with the karka is considered Seiser. So over there, that's considered Mechuber L'Karka, like I'm being told over here. That's considered Seiser. Now, by side, the Mishabura brings down, therefore, the people that take out these windows at their big Seudas, says the Mishabura, they're over on Seiser. Why they over on Seiser? And he says, Deraisa, they're over on. He says, even a goy can't do it. Because a Mir L'Akam, you're not allowed to do a Mir L'Akam Ayideh goy. So he says, it's Deraisa. What's the Deraisa? It's not a Seiser, Amanas live nice. It's Seiser, Shalai Amanas live nice. Grotto, I'm going to build it later on. So I guess you see from over here that anytime you're Seiser in a place that you're going to eventually rebuild, that's also called a Seiser Amanas live nice, which would mean that in our case, I would tell the person probably not to take out the light bulb. Now, the Shlomo Zalman, the Shmir Shabbos over there, he brings down, probably you shouldn't take out the light bulb. He says, but you could take out the light bulb if it's a type of light bulb that you only leave in mizman lizman. I'm not familiar with such a metzias. I don't know if the oilam is either. Is there such a metzias where you leave a light bulb in just from zman lizman? I'm not so familiar with such a metzias, but therefore, l'chayra, it should come out that one should prefer to turn on the light and not take out the light bulb, and to be Saimech Ribu Shurim is only D'Rabbanan. But either way, it's Pikuach Nefesh, so therefore it's allowed. Now, let's go a little bit weiter, Rabbi Yisai, in Ribu Shurim. First of all, there's a big klal over here, which we have to talk about, which is, excuse me, excuse me. The big klal over here is, can I do Ribu Shurim al Yedei a Goy? We're discussing the whole day, is Ribu Shurim Deraisa or is Ribu Shurim D'Rabbanan? But there's a big shaila over here. Can I do Ribu Shurim al Yedei a Goy? Now, this is a tremendous nafkamina. In other words, could the Goy be Seimech on the Rashba? If Ribu Shurim is D'Rabbanan, there's a tzad out there that Ribu Shurim is D'Rabbanan. So now, if a Goy is doing something, can I be Mar B'Shurim al Yedei a Goy? And then I'll consider it to be a shvus to shvus, which will be mutter b'makim something. What's the nafkamina? Watch. Person's going to the hospital on Shabbos for a good life, and his wife's having a baby. He's going to the hospital on Shabbos. Okay, there's a shaila of tchum. I don't want to get involved in that. Let's say it's a shaila where the hospital's within the tchum. He's going to the hospital on Shabbos, and he's going to be stuck there the whole Shabbos because if his wife's having a baby, he'll be stuck there the whole Shabbos. Now, in the hospital, let's say he doesn't have kosher food, and he's not going to have with him a sitter and a tillim and not wine for kiddush and challah. So he anyways has certain things that he's taking to the hospital. He has the basic papers he has to take for the hospital. He probably has to take his phone in case there's some type of medical numbers that he has, or his own specific doctors and whatever. So he has certain things that he's clearly allowed to take to the hospital. Now he has this bag. In the bag, he's not carrying it anyways. He has a guy, it's not a bahul dika matziv, it's not a very nerve-wracking matziv. So he wants the guy to carry the bag. The guy's going to carry the bag. The guy will open the door for him to get into the car. Now the guy is carrying the bag for him anyways, and the guy is driving the car. So he wants to know, in this bag, can I put wine? Can I put kiddush? Can I put a gemara, right? Can I put a challah? All these things. What's the shaila? The shaila is the guy is doing haitzah. The guy is doing haitzah. And let's say it's a tzadaraisa, let's say it's a Rosh Hashanah. The guy is doing Goitzah, and the guy is doing Goitzah, that's mutter. If Ribu Shurim is going to be D'Rabbanan, so now we're in business. If the Rashba is correct, so now we have what to talk about. The guy is doing it. He's doing the extra, what's in the bag. We're going to put in the wine and the challahs and the whatever, and the fritelim and the noyim elimelech and everything. So now you have what? You have in the bag extra Goitzah. What's that? That's according to the Rashba, and it's a D'Rabbanan. So now it's a goy. That's already Amir Lakim. That's D'Rabbanan number one. D'Rabbanan number two is Ribu Shurim, the wine, the challah. For what purpose? For the purpose of a mitzvah. The Einik Shabbos. Davening is a mitzvah. The daven dillim is for sure a mitzvah. Challah is a mitzvah. Lechem Mishnah is a mitzvah. Kiddush wine, etc. All these things are a mitzvah. So can I get the goy to do it? So the Maisa, I saw one sefer, not so thrilled about this. Ayin in the Machzal Yo, in Chelik Aleph, in Siman Lamed Vav, he's not so thrilled about this. It's based on a big shaila, is when we say Ribu Shurim, do we say that Ribu Shurim we just established is a shaila d'oraisa d'Rabbanan? What about if the Isser is d'Rabbanan? Do we also have Ribu Shurim? Goyin Rish Shlomo Zalman in the Shmir Shabbos, Perek Lamed Beis, in a Ora Reish Beis, he has a very strong side to say that b'mokim tzoyrich, we do not have the chumrah of Ribu Shurim on the Rabbanan. I will just add that in our case specifically, it's Amir La'akum. That means you're not the Jew is not doing it. It's Ribu Shurim, which the Rashba says is maybe the Rabbanan, which is the Rabbanan. It's a tzad that the Mishnah Berurah was Mesiachas to. So maybe it's a shvus to shvus, but more so, maybe you can be saimich that our Rosh Hashanah are not such pashut Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, you put that all together, and that I would be makel that the goy will be allowed to add into the bag your challah, your wine. Now there's a more complicated shaila, which is tchum, and that I can't get into now. Bez Hashem, the way the good over here is going, we'll get there soon. Amir Hashem Linader. That's l'chayra. That's l'chayra. Now. Interesting shaila, Rabbi Yisai, in Ribu Shurim, the Minchas Chinuch, in the Moisach Shabbos, Ois Beis, has a very interesting shaila, something to think about, Rabbi Yisai. When a person shechts an animal, there's Negea Mamish in this case in the Gemara. when a person shechts an animal, is there a difference between shechting a bigger animal or a smaller animal? This person needs meat on Shabbos. The chayla needs meat. So we're not allowed to be marba. So is there a difference between shechting a cow or a chicken? What do we say? The result is the same. The result is netilas neshama. What's the difference if I shecht a bigger thing or a smaller thing? Is there a difference? The Gemara says in one place, what's the difference if you shecht, you kill a whale or you kill a little tiny mosquito? It's the exact same thing. So the Minchas Chinuch, he has a tzad gadol to say, yes, there is ribui shiurim when it's a bigger animal. And the truth is, there's a diak in the Aruch HaShulchan just like this. In Sifta Zayin, Minchas Chinuch is famous. I don't know if the Aruch HaShulchan is as famous in this parsha. He says at Maradik Azach and Ar Siman and Shin Yud Ches and Sifta Zayin, he says, if you're going to be chayshish, shema k'sheyishtu v'yirtu lishtois oid, you're going to be chayshish, yishpetzu l'saychai oid mayim v'yosifu esev. You got a whole case over here, he says. He says, if you're chayshish for this, im kein nachshaish, you'll be chayshish also, shema yishchait oif yoser gadol. Says the Aruch HaShulchan, if you're going to be chayshish for that, then why aren't you going to be chayshish also that it'll come to shech the bigger chicken? Elamai, the Aruch HaShulchan proves that we're not chayshish for it. Abaisa, you know what the Aruch HaShulchan just said? He said, theoretically, you're not allowed to shech the bigger chicken because there's more netilas neshama. Now this Or Sameach in Perek Yud Ches in Halacha Aleph, he takes strong issue to this. He says he doesn't understand. He writes, "Hachiyav al neshama hu noitel lo yashir shemeis al yedei netil." Who cares if more blood came out, less blood came out? The chefza of the netila, the chefza of the neshama that left. That's what it is. It's kula kad netilas neshama. Pashit kayatzebei. Amar Reicha Chayvel Gabi Adam Katin Shahar Gagadol. Neshama Shakol Minei, Neshama Nishkol Minei. There's no difference between a small neshama, a big neshama. So that's an interesting shaila that I'm sure the Olam would like to look into. Now, I say there are other shailas, halacha the ma'isa, very negaya and ribashirim. I'll just read you a couple of them. In Siman Tavkov Gimel, in Hilchos Yontif, that's where the famous topic of ribashirim, where it's more negaya is that the halacha is that when a person is cooking for a yontif meal, so then generally he certainly doesn't have to worry when he's cooking for a yontif meal. If he's cooking just for the day, then we assume that then Avadi is allowed to cook and he doesn't have to be mitzamtzim. He's allowed to cook for the amount that he feels he's going to need for yontif, even if there's left over, right? However, on yontif, there's a heter to add to the amount that he's cooking. Now, basically, I'm not talking about when he's adding chicken or cholent to make a more geschmack of cholent because it tastes better when there's lots, and he wants a lot in there because it's going to taste better because that's for today. That's for sure mutter, even though he knows he's going to have extra for tomorrow. I'm talking about what happens a yid on Yontif. He comes and he says, look, I want to have a roast. I don't need this entire roast. For sure not. It's the first day of Yontif. We're going to eat this amount of roast, not that amount of roast. But you know what? I might as well have for tomorrow, for the Yontif Sheni. So we know that to cook specifically for Yontif Sheni is aser. And we're learning now that Ribui Shiurim isn't Ribui Shiurim. This is an added amount. He doesn't need that. If it would be the chayla, we would tell him cut that piece of meat and only cook the amount that's necessary. That's the chiddush of Yontif. Yontif, the chiddush is that if you have 3 tnayim, which I'll say in a moment, so then the halacha is you're allowed to cook on Yontif, increasing something for after Yontif, even though you're certainly not going to need it on Yontif. Now, what are the 3 tnayim you must have? Tnai number 1 is that, and this is where it's not being a benefit even for today at all. It's a case where it doesn't make any difference to the taste of the meat today. Okay. So, but if you put the food in the pot beforehand, right, and you place it on the fire before you start cooking. In other words, I have this piece of meat or I have a few pieces of meat. I take a bunch of pieces of meat and I put them in the pot and I cook it and I put it into the pot before I put it on the fire, and then I put it on the fire, even though it's Ribui Shiurim, and you're clearly not going to be eating it today. Alpha Pekin, you're allowed to do it. That's Tnai number 1. Tnai number 2 is there can't be any extra effort that's necessary. I'll give examples in a moment, right? And Tnai number 3 is you're not allowed to say it. You're not allowed to say that whole conversation that I just had. You're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to say, I'm cooking today for today and tomorrow. You're not allowed to do it. You're allowed to just put it on before without extra tircha and have the leftovers for tomorrow. what's the examples of this, Rabbi Isai? So examples of where it would be a problem will probably be something like schnitzels. If a person knows today he only needs 4 or 5 schnitzels, and he goes and starts frying up 17 schnitzels, so that's going to be a problem. Because there, each and every separate schnitzel, you have to turn it over, and each one has a separate tircha. So that taka would be a problem. That's one example, would be a problem. If a person has to make a kugel, and he says, why should I make one kugel on this size? I'll make a huge kugel. That's a problem because you have to peel and you have to grind, and there's a lot of extra tircha that you have to do. So then we don't allow this. And another thing is like I said, he's not going to be allowed to go and say it. Another example of this is kreplach or stuffed cabbage, things like that. So then you're only going to be allowed to do the ones that are needed for the yontif. Because if you're going to start doing the ones that are for yontif sheni, that requires extra tircha. Now, if you made the whole mixture on Erev yontif of all the kreplach, or you did Erev yontif, all of the stuffed cabbage, you just didn't cook it yet, so that's not an extra tircha. As long as you're not saying it, you'll be allowed to put it into the pot and put it onto the fire beforehand. But if you have to actually do the tircha on yontif, so then that we're not going to allow. That we don't allow. Now, by side, there's one last sugi over here of Rebbe Shurim, Be'etzim in the Lacha. We have covered most of these inyanim over here. It's just interesting to how it plays itself out in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch in Shin Kaf Ches, the Shulchan Aruch says in Simin Shin Chaf Ches Sif, I think Tazayin, I think it was. So what happens? Amdu the Shtei Greigris. That's the core of Rebbe Shurim. The person on Shabbos, he needed 2 dates. Okay, you had to cut down dates from a tree. The loy matzu el shtei greigris b'shnei uksin. But you find on the tree 2 dates in separate that are connected separately. They're not coming from one stalk. The shalosh boiketz echad. So he has 2 over there. He has a choice. He has 2 over there. This guy needs 2 dates. Okay, so double dating. He has 2 dates on the tree in separate stalks, which he'd have to do 2 ma'aseh kaitzers, 1, 2. Or he has 1 branch, which is attached to 3 greigorists. Says the Shulchan Aruch, korsina oiketz sheyesh by shalosh. Cut down the one with 3. V'mayu shtei ba'oiketz echad. And not only that, let's say I have 2 that are attached by 1 stalk, or 3 that are attached by 1 stalk. So then cut down the one with 2. Don't do the one with 3. La yichazu ela, the one with 2. You know, so the Ramah warns right away in all these inyanim, if the situation is boil, don't ask questions. The case I said before, the person needs to know which car to take. If there's a chalila, a boil, a chalila heart attack or something, chalila, avada, just run, take the first car you see and go. Don't ask if it's a smaller car, if it's a bigger car, if it's an electric car, don't ask. But if we're talking about when the time is not of the essence, time is not the answer. This is the etzim ha-makor. This is where the Mishnah Berurah says, you see from over here that Rebbe Shurim is not just by shchita, it's not just by bishul, it's by all the malachas. It's even by situation of kaitzer. In all these situations. So Rabbi saying, what did we see today? We saw that the Geshmak is sugi of Rebbe Shurim. We saw the big shaila if Rebbe Shurim is derabanan, if Rebbe Shurim is deraisa. Then we saw the Gavaldik Chiddush of the Machane Yisrael, that the Machane Yisrael was willing to be falazech and seimich on the sheet of derabanan. Al Kapanim b'makim, this Shazat Chak Noira, right? And to consider Rebbe Shurim D'Rabbanan, and there was an added Chiddush to that. So it's D'Rabbanan, but why do I have a right to do D'Rabbanan? I guess you have to say, like we said, because the person's boil, and then he'll come to be over on a D'Rais if you don't let him do a D'Rabbanan. We saw the Lachas Kapi Hilchos Yontif, that Rebbe Shurim, even if it's not going to enhance the food of right now, it's being done really for tomorrow. As long as you don't say it, and as long as there's no extra tircha, and as long as you did it beforehand, there's a heter of Rebbe Shurim. Rebbe Shurim requires me to make sure that I avoid the situation by pikuach nefesh. If I could take out a light bulb, well, that we said you can't do because that'll be itself a deraisa. But if I could choose a room that has a lower wattage or less light bulbs, you're supposed to choose that room. Derech agav, one of the terim of why, let's say a person on Shabbos, he has a heter of amir la'akum. Let's say all the lights in his house go out, the whole switch goes out, everything blows. So if he has a child in the house and the child is scared, So that's an example where we would allow a mir la'akum. Normally, we would not allow a guy to come and turn on the lights on Shabbos. But if his children are scared, or his wife is scared, or he's scared, so then in such a case, we would let a guy turn on the lights, because that would be considered like a chayla. That's everything else is going to go on also. The air conditioning, the heat, the hot plate, all these other things are going to go on also. And Amir Lakim is not mutter for all those things. You have a special heter. So someone to say, well, you know what? That's maybe just Ribu Shurim. Ribu Shurim, we went back to what we said before. Maybe that's Ribu Shurim. So it's Amir Lakim doing a Ribu Shurim, that's Shvus to Shvus, b'makim, a lot of those things that we'll consider now to be tzarich gadol or mitzvahs, v'chadoima, that we wouldn't have had if this wouldn't be a Ribu Shurim. We saw Geshmak Shaila's Ribu Shurim on Netilas Neshama. Is there a difference between a big chicken and a little chicken? That's a very interesting Shaila that the Olam we'd be able to clear. And then we saw that Avada the Chavetz Chaim was written by one Chavetz Chaim. There was a different pen that the Chavetz Chaim looked over, and with that we asked the Geshmak Shaila. In one place, the Chavetz Chaim says that Bishul Akum that was cooked beheter on Shabbos, Moitzei Shabbos, is mutter for a bari. In another place, the Chavetz Chaim says that Bishul Akum that was cooked beheter on Shabbos, Moitzei Shabbos is usher even for the Chayla, Kavachaymer, the bari. So we answered, Avada, it's one Chavetz Chaim. Must be one case with Chayla Sheyesh by Sakana, we have a heter there. Chayla She'ein by Sakana, Chazal didn't give a heter there. We saw some other interesting shilas over here about raw meat. Raw meat is something that on Shabbos is a very big shilah. If it's muksa, l'chatchila, we consider raw meat to be muksa. If you have ice cream in the freezer and it's behind raw meat, so you're allowed to take the ice cream from the tub, pull the ice cream, even if the raw meat moves memela, but you shouldn't l'chatchila move the raw meat to get to the ice cream. You're supposed to consider raw meat muksa. But b'shas chak, that's what we saw in our sugya, raw meat is not considered muksa. No, so halavai, only the yontif shiles will be negeya, and not the nefesh shiles will be negeya. We're zeicha to the grace yontif Rabbi Isai. The grace yontif is next week when we learn about the machlekes of electricity, the machlekes of goyin v'shleimus almin and goyin achazanish. That's the grace yontif. To us is a ribui shiurim. This entire get together is a ribui shiurim Rabbi Isai, but this is a ribui shiurim derabanan, which is a vada a kiddushem shemayim.